Welcome to the Darksomnium. Here are 3 creepy, unexplained mysteries. Cheryl DeBoer was born Cheryl Diane Peterson in Seattle, Washington in 1962. She was raised in the suburb of Mountain Lake Terrace, Washington, and graduated from Eastern Washington University in 1985, earning a degree in chemistry. She married Michael DeBoer and had a son, Eric. In 2001, she was hired by the Fred Hutchinson Center in Seattle as an HIV/AIDS researcher. From all reports, she was happy with her job, marriage, motherhood, and life in general. On the morning of February 8th, 2006, Cheryl was 53 years old and had been working for Fred Hutchinson for 15 years. She had the typical life and routines of a suburban middle-aged working woman. She got out of bed, dressed for work, took meat out of the freezer to thaw for dinner, and drove to the park and ride. After texting the driver of her carpool group that she would be about 10 minutes late, she never arrived. After hearing that his wife didn't show up for work that day, Cheryl's husband, Michael, called the police on the evening of the 8th, and they began searching for her. They quickly found her car on the street by the park and ride, and there were bloodstains on the driver's side and passenger side of her vehicle. The car was locked, and there was no damage to the outside of the vehicle. On February 14th, 6 days later, Cheryl's body was found in a culvert 1.5 miles from her car. The culvert was deeply hidden by wild blackberry bushes, evergreen trees, and other vegetation, and a creek passed through it. Cheryl's body laid face down in the creek with a plastic bag over her head and a razor blade in her pocket. In August, Snohomish County Police officially ruled her death a suicide, sparking outrage from her family and the public. Her husband says Cheryl would never kill herself. Her mother, Lenore Peterson, says that it doesn't make sense for someone to begin preparing for dinner, text a coworker that she would be 10 minutes away, drive to the park and ride, then walk nearly 2 miles through mud and thorns to kill herself. Lab testing has found that the razor cuts on Cheryl's fingers appeared to be self-inflicted, and that the blood on the driver's seat is Cheryl's blood. However, the blood in the passenger seat was that of an animal. It is unclear if the DeBoers had a pet. If they did, Cheryl didn't take it to work with her. The coroner concluded her cause of death was asphyxiation. At the time of Cheryl's death, it happened the same week a woman from Edmonds went missing. The other woman ended up being a drug addict who died of hypothermia after becoming disoriented in the woods while heavily intoxicated. That case is firmly closed. While Cheryl DeBoer's has been closed by police, many remain skeptical of their opinion. At 7:45 on the morning of December 1st, 1845, Anne Gaze was woken up by frantic knocking on her door in Westminster, England. The caller was a young woman named Martha Browning, who lived with Anne's mother, the 60-year-old Elizabeth Mundel. A breathless Martha told Anne that her mother had taken ill about 45 minutes ago and was now in very poor health. Anne, followed by Martha, immediately went to her mother's lodging. However, what she found there was quite bizarre. Elizabeth Mundel was not, as might be expected, lying in her bed. Indeed, 3 heavy chairs had been piled up on Elizabeth's bed. Anne Gaze turned to ask Martha where her mother was, but even before she could say a word, her unspoken question was answered. There, On a large box behind the door lay Elizabeth Mundel, still in her nightclothes, with a cord tied tightly around her throat. With the assistance of some neighbors, a baker's boy, and a surgeon called by Anne, the cord was cut, but Elizabeth Mundel could only be declared dead. The cord had been wrapped around her throat twice and tied tightly at the side. A Dr. John Charles Atkinson, who examined Mundel's body for the police inquest, later gave the testimony that he had found Elizabeth's face to be pale, swollen, and livid. Her eyes were wide open and blood had issued from her ears and nose. There was also some frothy matter which had come from the mouth. The cause of death was either hanging or strangulation, most probably the latter. The chairs on the bed were not the only curious detail in the room. Later the same day, Anne's husband, Edward Gaze, remade the victim's bed so that the body could be laid out on it. In doing so, he discovered that the mattress was wet. However, it was not the top, but the underside that was damp, suggesting that the mattress had been turned over after water had been spilled on it. Though already suspicious of her murdered mother's roommate, Anne invited Martha to stay with her and Edward until after the funeral. Living with the Glazes, Martha only managed until December 3rd not to become even more suspicious. She tried and failed to pay at a local shop with a prank note. A prank note exactly like the one Elizabeth had owned as a curiosity item, including a prominent stain and the inscription, Bank of Elegance. Edward Glaze marched Martha to the nearest police station, where the young woman immediately broke down and confessed, saying, "I cannot confess any longer. I murdered the old woman and deprived your wife of her mother." Only a few hours later, Martha Browning was officially charged with the willful murder of Elizabeth Mundel. A wall-to-wall neighbor of Elizabeth Mundel and Martha Browning, Mary Cheshire, testified at Martha's trial that she had seen Elizabeth at 10:30 p.m. Sunday, November 30th, at which time she was in good health and good spirits. At around 7 a.m. the following morning, December 1st, Mary had been awoken by a cry of murder. The cry appeared to be in Elizabeth's voice, and even as Mary rose from her bed, another cry rang out. This time, Mary was certain that it had been Elizabeth Mundel's voice, and she then went next door to see if there was any way she could help. Mary knocked on the bedroom door, but there was no answer. She knocked for a second time, and finally, Martha called out, "Nothing's the matter." Mary did not investigate further, but returned instead to her bed. Some 15 minutes later, there was a knock on Mary Cheshire's door. Climbing out of bed again, Mary found that it was Martha, who told her that the old lady had been in very poor health. It was Mary who advised Martha to go and tell Elizabeth's daughter. Martha then left the room, only to return minutes later with her coat and bonnet on. She said she was going to fetch Anne Gaze and asked Mary to keep an ear open in case Elizabeth made any noise while she was gone. Martha herself explained that she had not been able to open the door the first time the neighbor knocked, because at that time she was holding Elizabeth and washing her face in an attempt to revive her. Here is her testimony as it was read in court. "I have known the deceased, Elizabeth Mundel, for 6 months and have been lodging with her for 3 weeks tomorrow. She went to bed at 11 o'clock last night. She awoke me about an hour after we had gone to bed. She was turning about and was restless. She did not then speak to me. She woke me again at about 4 o'clock in the morning with a sort of plunge in the bed. It quite shook the room. I asked her what was the matter, and she said nothing but a dream. I asked her if I should get her anything, and she said she didn't want anything. She woke at 7 o'clock this morning. She seemed to have a fit. She threw her hands up to her face and screamed, "Murder! What are you doing to me?" I got up and washed her face with water. Presumably, here, the neighbor Mary Cheshire was knocking on the door and asked if I should go for her daughter. I then went to the woman in the next room and asked her if I had not better go for her daughter. I then went back to the deceased woman's room and put my bonnet and cloak on. She was then in bed, lying quietly. I went to the deceased daughter. I came back with the daughter in about a quarter of an hour. When we returned to the deceased's room, her daughter went in first, and I followed. Deceased was then lying on the box. She only had her nightclothes on. The cord was around her neck. I tried to undo the knot. Her daughter tried also. I ran out of the house and went to the baker's shop. The baker came and cut the rope. Said baker testified that the morning of December 1st, Martha Browning rushed into his shop, screaming, "For God's sake, send a man, there's a woman who hung herself." The final proof of Martha Browning's guilt seemed to be that the police finally found a piece of cord matching the one around Elizabeth's throat in a box with Martha's belongings. This evidence, together with Elizabeth's novelty banknote in Martha's possession and her confession at apprehension, closed the case for many. Martha was found guilty of murder and hanged on January 5th, 1846. But what did really happen in the morning of Elizabeth Mundel's death? Did Martha kill her elderly roommate in cold blood and expect Elizabeth's family to mistake strangulation for natural death? Might the wet mattress actually prove Martha's account that she tried to revive Elizabeth by splashing water in her face? Why was the crime scene staged in this bizarre way? Chairs on the bed, wet mattress turned over, body on the box behind the door. On November 17th, 1981, a pair of hunters found the body of a naked, white male floating in the Paint Creek near Lamp Road in Fayette County, Ohio. The male, whose age also speculated anywhere between 15 to mid-20s, was completely nude. Divers searched the river and were unable to find any evidence linking the man to his identity. However, the coroner noted he may be of Caucasian-Hispanic mix due to his olive complexion. It was also noted that he bore a tan line similar to male bikini bottoms, and is believed he came from the western United States, such as California or Arizona, possibly even Mexico. Reports say the male had suffered 2 small caliber bullet wounds that had entered his chest and passed through his body. The wounds were then carved open with a knife, and the victim was stabbed over a dozen times for what investigators believe may have been an attempt to conceal the fatal gunshot wounds. The male was in good physical condition. His teeth were all taken care of, and his body showed no signs of prior abuse or neglect. Also, his face is recognizable. So you have a young, obviously cared for male found face down in a creek in the middle of central Ohio, sporting a tan in November. Also suspicious is the fact that investigators believe he was shot twice, bullets removed, and then stabbed about a dozen other times. The author of this post has 3 theories as to how this case might have played out. 1. He was a migrant worker who made his way to Ohio for some purpose, whether it be work or family. This could be why, despite being recognizable, he remains unidentified due to the possibility of being undocumented. Number 2. He was brought to Ohio by someone, and something went wrong along the way, whether it be for trafficking purposes, robbery, or some other purpose. Number 3. He was killed elsewhere and dumped. Lamp Road is very close to Interstate 71, and this can tie into Theory 2. And they may have picked this area due to how secluded it is, not taking into consideration hunting season